This is Section 5 of Mark Twain's Journal Writings, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jim Smiley's Frog, by Mark Twain. Read by John Greenman.
Well, this yer Smiley had rat terriers and chicken cocks and all of them kind of things, till you couldn't rest, and you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on but he'd match you. He ketched a frog one day and took him home, and said he calculated to educate him, and so he never done nothing for 3 months but set in his backyard and learn that frog to jump. And you bet he did learn him, too. He'd give him a little punch behind, and the next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a doughnut. See him turn one somerset, or maybe a couple, if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right, like a cat. He got him up so in the matter of catching flies, and kept him in practice so constant that he'd nail a fly every time as far as he could see him. Smiley said all a frog wanted was education, and he could do most anything. And I believe him. Why, I've seen him set Dan'l Webster down here on this floor— Dan'l Webster was the name of the frog— and sing out, "Flies, Dan'l, flies!" And quicker'n you could wink he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off on the counter there, and flop down on the floor again, as solid as a gob of mud, and fall to scratching the side of his head with his hind foot as indifferent as if he had no idea he'd been doing any more'n any frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was, for all he was so gifted. And when it came to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground at one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit, you understand, and when it come to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellers that had traveled and been everywhere all said he laid over any frog that ever they see. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him downtown sometimes and lay for a bet. One day a feller, a stranger in the camp he was, came across him with his box, and says, "What might it be that you've got in the box?" And Smiley says, sorter indifferent like, "It might be a parrot, or it might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog." And then the feller took it and looked at it careful, and turned it around this way and that, and says, "So 'tis. Well, what's he good for?" "Well," Smiley says, easy and careless, "he's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." The feller took the box again, and took another long particular look, and gave it back to Smiley, and says, very deliberate, "Well, I don't see no p'ints about that frog that's any better'n any other frog." "Maybe you don't," Smiley says. "Maybe you understand frogs, and maybe you don't understand 'em. Maybe you've had experience, and maybe you ain't only a amateur, as it were. Anyways, I've got my opinion, and I'll risk $40 that he can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." And the feller studied a minute, and then says, kinder sad like, "Well, I'm only a stranger here, and I ain't got no frog, but if I had a frog I'd bet you." And then Smiley says, "That's all right, that's all right. If you'll hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog." And so the feller took the box, and put up his $40 along with Smiley's, and set down to wait. So he set there a good while, thinking and thinking to himself, and then he got the frog out, and prized his mouth open, and took a teaspoon, and filled him up full of quail shot. Filled him pretty near up to his chin, and set him on the floor. Smiley, he went to the swamp, and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he ketched a frog, and fetched him in, and give him to this feller, and says, "Now, if you're ready, set him alongside of Dan'l, with his forepaws just even with Dan'l's, and I'll give the word." Then he says, "1, 2, 3, jump!" and him and the feller touched up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off, but Dan'l gave a heave and histed up his shoulders so, like a Frenchman, but it wasn't no use, he couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as an anvil, and he couldn't no more stir than he was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted, too, but he didn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. The feller took the money and started away, and when he was going out at the door, he sorter jerked his thumb over his shoulders, this way, at Dan'l, and says again, very deliberate, "Well, I don't see no p'ints about that frog that's any better'n any other frog." Smiley he stood scratching his head and looking down at Dan'l a long time, and at last he says, "I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off for. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He 'pears to look mighty baggy, somehow." And he ketched Daniel by the nape of the neck and lifted him up and says, "Why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pound," and turned him upside down, and he belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was, and he was the maddest man. He set the frog down, and took out after that feller, but he never ketched him.
End of Jim Smiley's Frog, by Mark Twain. Read by John Greenman.